I love the Grunge brush in Procreate and I use it all the time. So I thought it's time I should experiment and see what else is in Procreate, because there's lots of brushes there that I've never ever touched. So today I'm going to paint this photograph using brushes I've never used before in Procreate. So let's get into it. I love the brushes in Procreate, and as you know, if you followed me for a while, you may have downloaded them. I've made a lot of my own brushes, but there's some really cool brushes in Procreate, and I haven't neglected them in the past, so I thought I'd make amends today and start looking at some of the other brushes that are available. So I made a folder and I called it Experiment, and I threw a few brushes in there. I put one in called Stucco, one in called Wet Acrylic, one called Bamboo, Cotton, and one called Sable. And I had a little play around with them, and I decided that I was going to do a painting with just using two brushes, and that was the Stucco brush and the Sable brush. So this old painting is painted just using those two brushes. I've never used them before, and the Stucco brush got me really excited because I love textures and I love getting sort of textures on the paper really quickly, and the Grunge brush does that. And now I've found another one, the Stucco brush, which does a similar thing but a very different texture. It's almost chalky, it's almost like using a piece of charcoal, I guess, but I loved it. And what I'm thinking was, if there's a brush that you want me to use to paint a picture in, it's a bit of a challenge here. Just put in the comments below, Steve, have a go with this brush, and I'll see if I can come up with anything from your ideas. So hopefully I'll see some ideas of different brushes to try. Anyway, back in with this. I pretty much started on one layer, except for now you can see I painted this bird cage. It looks like a bird cage. It's obviously not, because the birds would just fly out of it, but I painted that on a second layer just so I could resize it, and you saw me resizing it there and moving it about. But I've got a square canvas. That's something else I've never done before. I actually painted on a square canvas. Usually I'm working on a rectangle, usually sort of 16 by 24 or 24 by 36 or something like that. But this time I'm working on a square canvas, and as I say, I pretty much got all of the background, that chalkboard, the flowers in the front, the pot, the crates, all went in on one layer. Then I created a second layer to start putting in that detail, and then I just kind of kept working on that layer. And at this point I'm still only using the Stucco brush. I felt that I didn't need to use any other. It was all coming together really well. I picked the colours off the colour circle. I didn't use a palette. Every now and again I just did one. I selected one off the palette, but most of the time I was pulling them off the colour wheel, and that seemed to be the best way to go, because somebody was asking me in the comments a while back, do I use palettes or do I lift colour off the photo? Very rarely do I lift colours off the photo, and if I'm doing it like this, where I split the screen and put the photo on the left side, and you can't lift the colours off them like that. Procreate doesn't recognise that area of the screen as part of its app, so you can't do that. You can use color palettes. I could have, I suppose, imported the photo into Procreate and then selected all the colors, but I'm not going to be doing that. And a lot of artists consider that to be cheating anyway, lifting colors straight off the photo. I must admit, I've used paintings and lifted the colours off to create a palette, and then taken a totally different photo to work with using that colour palette. But this time I'm sort of eyeballing it and making the colours as I go, and they're pretty similar to the photo, I guess. I'm just looking at the drawing of the guy there, wondering why I've given him a hunchback and a sort of, looks like he's been kicked in the back or something. He's got this sort of right curvature going off there. That's not very sort of realistic. I guess I do change that, right? I wait right to the very end, because you know, you get sort of stuck into something and you're not looking at the old painting all the time. You sort of just concentrating on the area you're working on. I've changed brushes now, by the way. I'm using the Sable brush, and it's really weird because when you add the Sable brush small, if you set it to small size, it looks like a chalk brush, but when you make it large, it acts very much like a traditional paintbrush with lots of strokes. And I don't, when they call it a Sable, I don't think they mean that it's like the stroke looks like the fur of a sable, something like that. I think it's made of the idea, it's like old paintbrushes used to be made of sable, and I think that's what's going off. That's what they mean by that. Anyway, I felt those two brushes together gave a really nice contrast. You've got this sort of Sable brush with the fur-like strokes, but also when it's small, it gives this chalky feel to it, rather like the Stucco brush. So they did work together really, really well. I didn't have any trouble at all with using these brushes. I didn't need to seem to settle into using them. I like them straight away. One thing that I did find not quite as good was usually when I'm using a brush, I'll set it to the blending brush as well, so I get the same kind of effects with the blend as I do with the paintbrush. And I did feel as though I only used the Stucco brush as a blending brush, and I felt that was the bit that let it down. It didn't give exactly, it wasn't really blending very well. The colours weren't blending together to exactly as I would have liked. I would like to see a bit more flow with them. But I guess if I'd have gone into the settings of the brush, I could have tweaked it a little bit and you know, sort of adjusted them, but I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to try the brushes out as is. I was particularly fond of the reflections in the puddles that I got there. I thought they looked quite nice. So this was a painting that I did on several layers, really. I kind of worked up an area and then sort of merged it down to the layer below it, so the sort of the bulk of the work stays on one layer, and then I was doing a bit more detail. I create another layer over the top of that. This one is very similar to the video I did where I was sort of chilling out on the settee listening to Chet Baker, whereas when I finished it, I felt that it all looked a bit flat and I needed some shadows to be get going there. So in a while you'll see me create some new layers, and I set the blend mode to multiply to sort of resolve that problem. But at the minute everything's just being painted on one or two layers, all set to normal blend mode. This was like sort of folded paper that it got. I guess the guy had got plants inside the folded paper low down that I couldn't see. So I guess they make sort of interesting shapes, but they looked a little bit odd, and I sort of struggled with that little part of the painting. I like these sort of, I don't know if they're sort of birds' nests, you know, for putting in the garden to attract the birds or what, but I thought they made a nice pattern and texture to add to the painting, so I like those. I'm sort of trying to get the darks in. I'm all about light and painting light, and I wanted to sort of make sure I get areas of light sort of bouncing here and there. the bell, I have to say I did cheat. I painted one bell, and then a bit later on, because you can't see it in the photo there's actually two bells, and a bit later on when I moved the photograph and I saw there was a second one, I actually copied and pasted that bell, saved me having to paint it again. And then what I do, if I do that, I generally just tweak it a little bit with sort of colour and strokes, so it doesn't look like I've just cut and pasted it. I decided that I'd got the size of those paper things wrong. They were too big, and I just shrunk them down a little bit, so they were obviously on a separate layer. I felt that they weren't much better. I sign it, and then I think this is the point where I'm thinking, oh yeah, I need that bell, there we go, going on the right. So I sort of pasted that in, erased the bit that was covered by those two bits of white strips of paper, and I sort of tweaked it a little bit just so it didn't look exactly like the first one. So then I decide that I want to get a few more highlights in, and I start edging parts of the clutter in front of the shop, I guess you'd call it, with a lighter colour. And then I realise I've sort of put some of the light areas where it would actually be in shade, and then I start thinking a little bit more realistically about what the light. At first I just randomly put these highlights on it, and I thought, what are you doing? You know, it wouldn't work like that. Think how the light would be. So then I started to put the colour in rather in blocks, so you can see on those boxes there. And then what I decided, after looking at it for a while, I needed this multiply layer, and I sort of put on a really dark colour and I lifted a few areas out and then softened it. Now that was a blue grey, and then I went in with another layer which was much warmer, more almost like a purple, and then put a few more dark shadows in there and soften that down again. And there, I think that makes an absolute massive difference to the finished painting just by putting them highlights in. And that is it. That is my painting with the Stucco brush and the Sable brush in Procreate. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, a big thumbs up as always is much appreciated. And if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, because I've got lots of videos like this and I would love to be sharing them with you. So hopefully I will see you all in the next one. Bye.